In 2019, a transfer quarterback from Ohio State met a sophomore receiver at LSU and changed everything. Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase combined for 20 touchdowns and 1,780 receiving yards that season on the way to a national championship win.
And they got one hand on the trophy.
When they reunited in Cincinnati in 2021, the Bengals drafted Jamar 5th overall over Penei Sewell.
Jamar Chase.
A decision that looked crazy at the time, but they made it to the Super Bowl in their first year together. However, the story since that Super Bowl run has been something nobody could have predicted. Incredible individual numbers buried underneath injuries and poor roster management from the front office. Joe Burrow was not a big deal when he arrived at LSU. He was a graduate transfer from Ohio State, and a lot of people outside of Baton Rouge had no idea who he was. But that changed really quickly. In his first season as the full-time starter in 2019, Burrow put up numbers that nobody saw coming. He threw 5,671 yards and 60 touchdowns in one season, and he did it with a completion percentage over 76%, which are not just good numbers, but historically ridiculous ones for a college QB. The reason it worked was Jamar Chase. Jamar was a sophomore that year, and he emerged as one of the most dominant receivers in college football history. He caught 84 passes for 1,780 yards and 20 touchdowns, and he did it against some of the best defenses in the country every single week. The combination of Burrow's accuracy and Chase's ability to make plays down the field was unfair. They connected on deep ball after deep ball, and defenses had no answer. What made their connection special was not just the talent, but the work they put in together. After the 2018 season where Chase struggled with drop passes, Burrow and his receivers threw and caught an estimated 10,000 balls during the summer to prepare for 2019. 10,000 extra throws and catches in the Louisiana humidity with nobody watching. Former LSU coaches often found Burrow working with Chase and the other receivers on Saturdays in the summer or after practices if things didn't look right, and the extra work showed up on the field immediately. By the time the playoff rolled around, those two and the team were playing at a completely different level. They beat Oklahoma in the semifinal and put up over 500 total yards of offense and 8 touchdowns. Then they beat Clemson in the championship game with Joe throwing for 463 yards and 5 scores, while Jamar went off for 221 yards and 2 TDs. LSU won 42-25 while the country watched in awe. Burrow won the Heisman and Chase won the Bilenikoff Award. They were the first quarterback-receiver duo in college football history to put up those kinds of numbers together in a single season, and it wasn't particularly close. The interesting thing is that nobody planned this. Burrow wasn't supposed to be at LSU. He was supposed to be the backup at Ohio State. Chase was a 4-star recruit who wasn't even the most famous teammate on his own high school team. That was Christian Fulton. The way they found each other and built what they built was almost accidental. But by the end of the 2019 season, they had won a national championship and changed the way people thought about what an offense could be forever. When the Bengals had the 5th overall pick in the 2021 NFL Draft, the decision wasn't obvious. Penei Sewell was on the board. He was an elite offensive tackle from Oregon who many analysts thought was the safest pick at a position of need for Cincinnati, since the Bengals' offensive line had been terrible for years. Joe had gone consistently hit in his rookie season, and it led to him tearing his ACL. Anyone who understood football knew that protecting the quarterback was the right move, and so instead, the Bengals took Jamar Chase. The reaction was split. Some people loved it because the connection with Burrow was already proven, and Chase was an elite talent who could come in and contribute immediately, even after sitting out a year. Other people thought it was a disaster. The offensive line was already a problem, and passing on Sewell to take another receiver when you already had T. Higgins felt like a luxury pick at a position that didn't need it. Jamar also had some rough moments in the preseason with drop passes that made people wonder if the transition to the NFL would be smooth. But Burrow wasn't worried. When the coaches asked him about the receiver, he told them that Chase was as reliable as the day is long. And that's a phrase that Bengals offensive coordinator at the time, Brian Callahan, later used to describe why they made the pick. Joe knew what he had seen in practice, and he knew that Jamar wasn't just talented, but dependable when it mattered most. The Bengals coaches didn't just take Burrow's word for it. They had watched Chase destroy some of the best college cornerbacks in the country. They had seen him beat future NFL players like Trayvon Diggs in the SEC championship game and AJ Terrell from Clemson. And they also knew that the talent was real, and they knew the connection with Burrow was already there. When you have a chance to reunite a duo that had already won a national championship together, sometimes you just have to trust the fit. Jamar himself was pretty confident. He knew that the questions would keep coming and that the draft debate would rage on, but he also knew what he could do on the football field, and that was be special. And this is where the real test began. Nobody knew if the LSU connection would survive the jump to the pros or if Chase would prove the doubters wrong about the preseason drops. The Bengals had made their bet, and the season ahead would answer every question. What nobody outside the building understood at the time was just how much Joe wanted this. He texted Jamar on draft night and told him to pack his bags for Cincinnati. The reunion was weeks in the making, and the Bengals front office made the call to bring them back together. The decision looked bold at the time, and it looked even bolder once the season started. The 2021 Bengals weren't supposed to be good. Joe was coming off of a rookie season where he got hit more than any other quarterback, and the offensive line going into that year was still a huge question mark. Most people expected the Bengals to be competitive but not dangerous. Instead, something unexpected happened, and the dynamic duo picked up right where they left off at LSU. Jamar finished his rookie season with 1,455 receiving yards and 13 touchdowns, setting the single game and single season rookie receiving yards record. But the real impact showed up in the playoffs. The Bengals made it to the Super Bowl in their first season with Burrow and Chase together. Wildcard round against the Raiders, Burrow and Chase connected on several big plays. Divisional round against the Titans, the chemistry was evident on crucial third downs. Back-to-back games where Jamar had over 100 receiving yards as well. Then came the AFC Championship against the Kansas City Chiefs in a game that nobody expected the Bengals to win. They went into Kansas City and beat the defending AFC champions on the road. Joe threw for 250 yards and 2 touchdowns. Chase had 54 yards and a score, but it was the way that they moved the ball together that mattered. They were operating on a level that most duos never reach, coming back from 18 points down in the second half alone. The play that defined their connection that season came in Week 17 against the Kansas City Chiefs. Burrow had hit Jamar Chase on a 72-yard touchdown that was pure insanity in the first quarter alone, and Jamar would go on to have 266 yards for that game. After the game, Burrow laughed about it and said everybody knows the meme, and they just throw it up to Chase and he makes a play. The famous quote was, "F it, Jamar's down there somewhere." But the real story wasn't the meme, it was the trust. Joe knew exactly where Jamar was going to be, and Jamar knew exactly where the ball would arrive. That's what years of extra work together will do. They lost to the Rams in the Super Bowl. The Bengals couldn't protect Burrow in the fourth quarter, and the offensive line collapsed at the worst possible moment. But the fact they even got there was remarkable. In their first season together, Burrow and Chase had taken a franchise that hadn't been to the playoffs in years to a Super Bowl. The foundation was set, and the expectation was that they would only get better from there. Here's where the story gets complicated. The Bengals had just made the Super Bowl that 2021 year, and so the expectation was that everybody would just build on that. However, over the next few years, it was a slow erosion of a team based on injuries and then bad front office decisions on top of that. Burrow's appendix burst before the 2022 season, and he missed part of training camp. The Bengals still finished 9-8 and made it back to the AFC Championship game, but they lost to the Chiefs. Then 2023 came and everything fell apart. Joe's wrist injury in Week 11 ended his season, and the Bengals collapsed without him. The hope that had been building after the Super Bowl run turned into a long winter of what-ifs. The hardest part wasn't just losing him, it was watching the offensive line fail him again and again. The Bengals had opportunities to fix the line through the draft and free agency, and they consistently chose cheaper options or ignored the position entirely. Joe got hit more than any quarterback in the league over his first few seasons, and the front office never made protecting him a priority, which was a dumb choice. It became an organizational philosophy that prioritized short-term savings over long-term success. Jamar also missed time with injuries, which didn't help. The Bengals weren't just losing Burrow, they were losing both of their star players at different points, and the supporting cast was not good enough to carry the load when they were out. T. Higgins is a solid second receiver, but he's not Jamar Chase. The running game was inconsistent, all while the defense was middle of the pack at best. But here's the strange part, when Burrow was healthy, the numbers never stopped. In 2024, Joe came back and put up the best season of his career. He threw for 4,918 yards and 43 touchdowns with just 7 interceptions, winning Comeback Player of the Year for a second time. He completed over 70% of his passes, he led the league in passing yards and passing touchdowns, all while being in the MVP race all the way up until the end of the season. The Bengals were 9-8 and missed the playoffs, but Burrow's individual numbers were historically great. Jamar was just as good. He won the Triple Crown in 2024, leading the NFL in receptions with 127, receiving yards with 1,708, and receiving touchdowns with 17. He became the 6th player since the NFL-AFL merger to lead all 3 categories in a single season, joining names like Jerry Rice and Steve Smith. He set franchise record for receptions and yards that year as well. The Bengals went 9-8 and missed the playoffs. And that's the part that doesn't make any sense to people who don't follow the team closely. How do you have 2 players putting up those kinds of numbers and still not make the playoffs? The answer is that football is a team sport, and the Bengals organization failed to build around their 2 best players in every way that mattered. Burrow himself acknowledged it after the season when he said that he thought he would have his best year, and he did, but he still thinks he can throw it better and the team can be better. That's the kind of comment that only makes sense when you know just how much better the situation around him could have been. He had his best season yet, so did Jamar Chase, and the team went 9-8 and missed the playoffs, which isn't a coincidence, it's an organizational failure. So here's the question, why does nobody talk about Burrow and Chase the way we talk about other elite duos of the past 5 to 10 years? Look at the other pairings in the NFL over the last few years. Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce are the gold standard for what a QB pass catcher connection can look like. Nobody debates whether they are great because they have the rings to back it up. Mahomes and Kelce have been together since 2018, they have those 3 Super Bowls together. Kelce's a first ballot Hall of Fame tight end, and Mahomes is already considered one of the best quarterbacks ever. Their connection is special because they have the same instincts on the field. Travis can adjust his routes mid-play when he sees the coverage, and Mahomes knows exactly where he's going to be. They have worked together for years in the same system with Andy Reid calling the plays, and the Chiefs have surrounded them with talent to keep them dangerous, up until recently. The Bengals never gave Burrow and Chase anything close to that kind of support. The offensive line was never fully fixed, and the coaching staff didn't make the kind of moves that Andy Reid made in Kansas City to keep the offense evolving. The front office was cheap in ways that directly hurt the QB and his top receiver, along with the defense. Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown have a Super Bowl together from 2024. The Eagles built their offense around both of them, and they made it work despite some rocky moments along the way. Brown admitted that he and Hurts had issues, but they pushed each other to be great and it worked out. The Eagles paid AJ and they kept him happy until it didn't, but they still had the hardware to back it up. Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp had their time there with the Rams. They had traded for Matthew Stafford in 2021 and they went on to win the Super Bowl, while Cooper Kupp went on to win the Triple Crown that season and the Super Bowl MVP. However, that window closed very shortly after, and now Matthew Stafford and Puka Nacua are the next two up. Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs were together for 5 seasons in Buffalo, and they made the Bills consistent contenders. Diggs left for Houston and then for the Patriots, but the connection they had was real. They were on the same page every week, and Allen trusted Diggs to make plays no matter what the defense was doing. The Bills built around Allen and gave him weapons, and it resulted in deep playoff runs year after year. Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb haven't won a Super Bowl together, but they have the brand. Dak is one of the most famous quarterbacks in the league because he plays for the Cowboys, and CD has become one of the most recognizable receivers in the game. They've never gotten over the hump in the playoffs, and they probably never will, but everyone knows their names. Burrow's less famous than Dak, despite putting up similar numbers or even better ones, and Chase is less famous than Lamb despite having a triple crown on his resume. The brand matters in the NFL, and Jamar and Joe play for a team that nobody pays attention to unless they're winning. Together they have the volume of history together from 2019 till now. But they don't have the rings, and they don't have the organizational success or cultural momentum. And that's what makes them weird. They've done everything right individually. They put up historic numbers together at every level they played at. They stayed together through injuries and setbacks, even organizational failures. And the result is that they sit in a strange middle ground where casual fans don't think of them really at all. The reason it happened isn't mysterious. The Bengals let the team rot while Burrow got hit over and over. The front office chose cheap fixes over real investments. Joe got hurt at the worst possible moments in 2022, 2023, and then again in 2025. But here's where it gets strange. The numbers never stopped. Even when the team was falling apart and the Bengals were losing games they should have won, they kept putting up points. It's not supposed to happen. Usually when a team fails, the star fails too. But they have been one of the best duos in football for 5 years, and you barely hear their names mentioned in the same breath as other elites. That's because the Bengals haven't won in a long time. They will be remembered as one of the most talented duos to never win a championship. That's the strange truth about Burrow and Chase. They have the college championship along with the Super Bowl appearance. They have the Triple Crown season. They have the MVP level years. They have the volume of history together that spans 5 seasons and 2 different levels of football. But they don't have a dynasty, let alone a ring to speak of. They don't have the moment where everyone suddenly realizes, yeah, they're the best in the league. In 10 years, people will talk about this duo the way people talk about Dan Marino and Mark Clayton, Cunningham and Randy Moss. Talented pairs who never got over the hump because the organization around them couldn't get out of their own way. But here's the difference. Marino and Clayton never won a national championship together. Cunningham and Moss never made it to a Super Bowl. Burrow and Chase did both. They did both, and still nobody talks about them the way that they should. It's not that they failed, the weird part is that they're great and nobody cares. Burrow played at an MVP level even after multiple injuries. Chase put up Triple Crown numbers on a team that missed the playoffs. They stayed together through all of it and kept producing at a level that very few duos in NFL history have ever reached. That's what makes it weirder than you think. They should be in the conversation with Mahomes and Kelce, but they aren't. They're underrated, and those are the reasons why. The 2026 season is coming and they're still together, so the Bengals will try again, and maybe this year is the year. Maybe the injuries stay away, but that's doubtful. Even if that happens, a strange legacy is already written. Two incredible players who did everything right and never got the credit they deserved because the team around them couldn't get out of its own way. So there you have it. Watch this next video if you haven't already and subscribe if you're new. Thanks for watching.